Today we're going to talk about the VCT 2025 schedule and some of the absurdities that lie within this schedule, because as you may or may not know, the 2025 schedule was changed to hopefully fix some of the problems that we had in 2024. Now, some of the problems that we had in 2024 was there was a burnout issue, because if you went deep in international tournaments, for instance, you were kind of constantly playing, and the off season was too long. So what Riot decided to do to kind of fix those two problems in one go was spread the schedule out a bit, right? We're going to start earlier than we did last year, and we're going to end later than we did last year, meaning more gaps kind of in between, and also a shorter off season because, we end later and start earlier. So that all seemed like a really, really good idea, but as we're about to experience, both me and you, if you watch VCT, there's some weird things still going on. So what I have done is I have created a VCT calendar for these upcoming months and what we're about to see. And what we've got here is you've got the last day of group stage for each region. So for China, it was the 13th. For Americas, it just happened on the 20th. For Pacific, it happened today on the 21st. And for EMEA, it will happen on the 25th. Now, already, there are some little quirks in the schedule just there. The fact that China, it always seems to be a week earlier than the other regions, but okay, that seems to always be the case. And EMEA was a week late this time. I don't really know why, but EMEA just was, right? So that means the EMEA group stage will be finishing when the playoffs for the other regions, I mean, China have already done a good amount of their playoffs, but Americas will be doing theirs, Pacific will be doing theirs, around about the time the EMEA group stage is finishing. So some already little weird quirks, but nothing too strange. But now let's talk about what is going to be pretty strange. Because if we take a look at the various playoff schedules, they're all over the place, right? Again, I want you to imagine that we are qualifying for an international event, right? So ideally, you would have all of the regions kind of end at a similar amount of time, and therefore give all of the different teams from those different regions a similar amount of prep time for that tournament. That is not happening here. Oh, no, 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 no. We don't do that in the VCT 2025 schedule, because you'll see that teams in China, some of them have already qualified for Masters, you see. Americas and Pacific will begin their playoffs, later on this week, essentially. And China will finish their playoffs on the 4th of May, as will VCT Americas, right? So Americas and China, they're both finishing on the 4th of May. However, you can see the Pacific do not. They finish on the 11th. And EMEA finishes on the 18th. Now, for EMEA in particular, I have no idea what's going on, because their group stage, yeah, they finished a bit later. They, some reason, have added in a 2-week gap before they start their playoffs. I don't know why. Also for China, there's a 2-week gap from, this first part of their playoffs and the end of their playoffs. I don't know why, right? Maybe it's because China wanted to finish on a reasonable date here of the 4th of May. Americas is also finishing on that date. And then Pacific and EMEA are finishing on different dates. So if you are an Americas team versus an EMEA team who's going to Masters, you have 2 weeks extra of prep that EMEA teams don't. So that in and of itself might be strange enough, but there's more to this, because if you remember, we are qualifying for the second Masters tournament. The second Masters tournament has 12 teams in it, and what that means is that if you finish as a first seed in your region, like Paper Rex, EDG, 100 Thieves, and Fnatic did last year for their regions, that means you don't take part in the Swiss stage. You actually just go straight to the playoffs. So you actually don't play in the first part of the tournament. So now I'd like you to imagine that you are the VCT China or VCT America Stage 1 winner, which means that you go straight to playoffs of Masters Toronto, right? Well, guess what? You played your last game on the 4th of May. You probably won't play in Toronto till about the 14th of June. You have a 6-week break before you end your grand final and play in Masters Toronto. But there's even weirder things potentially that are going to go on. For a moment, humor me, and let's assume that Wolves win in China, right? So Wolves have already qualified for Masters, right? So they've already qualified for this tournament that they won't be playing for about 2 months, right? But let's just say that Wolves, all right, they in April here, they qualified. They get to the finals here, in May of China, and let's say they win the grand final in China, right? So that gives them this absurd kind of thing going on where they won't play until the 14th of June, right? So they have this like 6 weeks off, and then they play in June. Humor me here. Let's say Wolves win Masters Toronto, right? So they, grind their way through this and manage to win Masters Toronto. And that's the thing, right? What do you do if you're one of these teams here in Americas or China? Are you constantly scrimming? Are you taking a 2 weeks off and then resuming scrimming before you travel? I don't know, right? But either way, Wolves, they get to Masters Toronto. You know, they win Masters Toronto. Good for them. I celebrate all that stuff. They then have to go home, right? So they've played here on the 22nd. They then have to go home, right? So they travel to China. So this day is probably a write-off. They then are going to lose a day essentially to the time zone difference, right? So probably the Monday, Tuesday, those writes off, right? They then have to obviously acclimatize back to China and the time zone. So, you know, probably these next couple days aren't too great for them either. Then they start to get back to a normal schedule, right? But then they're in the Esports World Cup. So then at some point, probably around these days, they have to travel to Saudi Arabia from China, get acclimatized to Saudi and all of that, and play in the Esports World Cup. Let's assume they win the Esports World Cup and play on the 13th. They then have to travel back to China and start playing in VCT China the very next week. So, if you are a Chinese team, there is a potential here that you have a 6-week break before playing in an international tournament, and then you pretty much are traveling and playing non-stop. This is what I mean about the schedule not making sense. Surely it would make more sense if the gap between the playoffs and the Masters tournament is actually just a couple weeks, and then we have a big break after the Masters tournament, rather than a shorter break after, especially if we're trying to fit the Esports World Cup in there as well now. It just doesn't make sense, as hopefully you can see right now. The schedule definitely needs some tweaking, some fixing, because one, it doesn't really make sense that all of the teams are on, or all the regions are on different schedules anyway, and then two, some of these teams might be playing pretty ridiculous schedules as well if they are doing pretty well in all of these tournaments.